Hi. So in the last video, we spoke about the first three verses of the Tao Te Ching. Today, I'm going to go through verse 4, 5, 6, and 7 and give my reflections on that. So yeah, let me get straight into it then. Verse 4. The Tao is an empty vessel. It is used but never filled. O unfathomable source of 10,000 things. Blunt the sharpness, untangle the knot, soften the glare, merge with dust. Oh, hidden deep but ever present. I do not know from whence it comes. It is the forefather of the gods. Okay, so starting with it being used but never filled, the way that I've come to understand that is, if you can imagine, we discussed in the first video about void, just very briefly, and how void is basically the stage or the space for the stage to be set in, the space from creation to be born, and then for that energy to drive out from, not the actual energy of creation, not the actual creation itself, but that space. So that space is always there. It's underlying in every creation. It's ever present, right? Never filled. Unfathomable source of 10,000 things. So not the actual 10,000 things. Again, this puts emphasis on the same thing. It's not the actual 10,000 things. It's where they came from. It's the source, right? Hidden deep but ever present. So with hidden deep, I imagine it to be, in fact, let me just read my notes for you. Void, hidden deep but ever present. So it's an inward journey, yet you need not go anywhere to find its presence. But when you go deep, you find that it was always everywhere. You don't need to search for what is always there, but somehow the act of going deep helps us to see that it was always there. Sometimes we're not aware of the fact that it is ever present, but the act of quieting the mind and going deep within our consciousness reveals to us that we never needed to go deep to find it, that it was always there. Okay? And then this also made me think of the universe being made mostly of dark matter and dark energy, and that normal matter is only 5%. I don't know if it's related, because dark matter and dark energy have roles, so they are even kind of beyond source. Dark energy, if I'm not mistaken, you got to look this one up. Dark energy being the force that pushes the universe out into expansion, and dark matter being the force that keeps it together, that brings it in. 60-something% of the universe is, and this is what's known right now through our scientific methods, which are very limited, but 60-something% is dark energy pushing out, and 20-something% is dark matter pulling in, and 5% is observable matter that our machinery and our technology is able to observe. I don't know if you can connect those two, the fact that dark something is always present, there is some kind of force, but I think even force is outside of void, or not outside of void, but it's a step away from just purely being, because it has intention, it has will, it has power, it has something that it is doing, right? Okay, so, and then the last line, it is the forefather of the gods. Yes! Meaning that it came before the gods, that there is a difference between God or gods and this unseen space, this void. That void first was, and then there was God, assuming the way that our religions have taught us about God and gods, right? Is that there is will. Gods have will. Gods have perspective because they are an individual expression of consciousness, right? And if they have perspective, then they have, what word did I use? If they have perspective, then they have agendas. And that makes them not the whole. It makes them still outside of the whole, if that makes sense. So this force, this Tao, is beyond the gods. It's beyond perspective. It's beyond agendas, beyond desire. Okay, so moving on to verse 5. Heaven and earth are impartial. They see the 10,000 things as straw dogs. The wise are impartial. They see the people as straw dogs. The space between heaven and earth is like a bellows. The shape changes, but not the form. The more it moves, the more it yields. More words count less. Hold fast to the center. Okay, so coming back to heaven and earth are impartial, non-judgmental. They don't have... This is interesting because it kind of goes against my previous verse. The previous verse about the forefathers and the gods having perspective, and the gods, because they have perspective, having agendas. But now saying that heaven and earth are impartial, being non-judgmental, assumes that maybe even with perspective and even with agenda, there can still be non-judgment. That we see this enactment, we see this playing out, but we do not desire for it to be different than it is, or we do not desire to give it value by naming it. So I will just go on as I have while making my notes. So they see the 10,000 things as straw dogs. So in ancient China, straw dogs were used ceremonially and were then discarded after the use. So what this kind of represented for me was the 10,000 things, all the things of creation are just there for a purpose, to be used for something, but not necessary to remain there, not necessary for the story to continue being told, for the purpose to be filled even once they leave. And then this goes on to say the wise are impartial, so the wise are non-judgmental. They see the people as straw dogs. Now this is a sensitive, this whole stanza, this whole section is a sensitive topic. And I think if it is not approached carefully, and if it is not understood maybe in its true meaning, or from a impartial perspective, if somebody who has intentions to use this information uses it, they can use it in a way that it is not meant to be used, and thus creating bad outcomes, karma. But I think when we approach this, we cannot come with this human perspective and say, I need to be impartial, and so be really mean to people and treat people terribly because because the universe uses these enactments through Samoan for experience. Let me get into my notes. Okay, so from an expanded perspective, they are a means to an end, and the end being the experience. All the 10,000 things are necessary for the experience, but they do not necessarily mean what they mean to the thing that's experiencing. For me, it means something very different to a being of higher consciousness. The being of higher consciousness sees the whole perspective, and they see the stage. They see all that is playing out. They may have compassion for those who are suffering, but they cannot understand it from an emotional and a physical standpoint, and so they are impartial. And that impartiality can come across as being cold and misunderstood. Teal Swan speaks about this with regard to people in this physical reality, living according to higher consciousness perspectives. And what she basically says is that higher consciousness beings do not understand the suffering of physical reality. And those in physical reality, though we may learn a lot from higher consciousness beings, we can sometimes fool ourselves into believing that reality is not what it is, but it is what it is to those of us in physical reality. We feel pain, we feel suffering. And so this is where that interesting dilemma comes in, is maybe living impartially without creating harm. I'll continue on with my notes. So it's a part of the whole, but not more or less important than other parts. If we are non-judgmental of good, then the same must be said of bad. So meaning that if we can see good as being what it needs to be for experience to happen, if we're assuming that the purpose of creation is for Source to have experienced itself in all facets, in all ways, then having those good experiences is necessary for them to see what they can do, Source, what they can do, or not, maybe not Source, maybe consciousness, greater consciousness, to see what it can do. But then we must also be impartial to the bad, that all the terrible stuff that happens not only on this earth, but all over the galaxy and the universe, seen and unseen, all the bad things that happen, we must take no standpoint, no judgment against it. And that's really hard from a human perspective, because we feel the suffering. So we know that to us it's very real, right? There are no sides to be taken, as every part is necessary for the experience of the whole. Alan Watts said, "Man suffers only because he takes seriously what the gods made for fun." I will leave it at that, and I will let you make your conclusions regarding that. The last two lines of this verse, more words count less, and the note that I made on that was, words cannot express ultimate truth. The minute we put something, or we put a word on it, we basically box it into the understanding that we have of that word. So say God, you have an idea in your mind of what God is. And so the minute you say God, it is already not God. Because our perspective of God is so limited, and trying to squash that greatness into this little box of our limited perspective immediately discards the fact that it is God. So it is not actually God when we speak of God. We speak of our tiny little perception. So we don't even speak of the thing as it is. So the more words are spoken, the further from truth they go. Okay, moving on to verse 6. The valley spirit never dies. It is the woman, primal mother. Her gateway is the root of heaven and earth. It is like a veil barely seen. Use it. It will never fail. I don't understand this verse, but what I took from it was nature, the valley spirit being nature, and that nature connects the seen and the unseen. I won't go more deeply into that because I think maybe on my next round through the book, something else will stand out. But for now, I will leave verse 6 as it is. If you have some ideas on it, please feel free to comment. I think it would be interesting to see your perspectives. Verse 7. Heaven and earth last forever. Why do heaven and earth last forever? They are unborn, so ever living. The sage stays behind, thus he is ahead. He is detached, thus at one with all. Through selfless action, he attains fulfillment. Okay, so when I hear the word earth, I think of physical reality. So not just earth, but all things of a physical nature, all things of this density. Okay. Why do they last forever? They are unborn and so ever living. No beginning means no end, right? You can't have an end if there was never a beginning. And there are people who dive into the deeper metaphysical meaning of this. You can look up Dolores Cannon if you wish to understand more of that eternal perspective, infinite perspective. How do you have infinite perspective? The two words are naturally opposing. But yeah, if you wish to dive into more of that, The Convoluted Universe is a very, very fascinating series. There's 5 books. She has others that are earlier than that, but I haven't read those, and I'm still on book 1, and I've tapped a little bit into book 3. So far, I would say that book or that series is worth exploring if you're interested in deeper metaphysical concepts. Okay, so the sage stays behind, thus he is ahead, non-competing. Excuse me. If you don't compete, you never lose, you never win. You stay centered. He is detached, thus at one with all. Through selfless action, he attains fulfillment. I'll read my notes on this. He's detached, thus one with all. Attachment means limitation and differentiation, right? If I am attached to something, then my attention is focused on this thing and on staying with this thing and this thing staying with me, right? Or this idea or this feeling or this concept or this person or this house, whatever, or this enlightenment, right? So non-attachment means non-differentiation. If there is no differentiation, then there is no separation. To be attached means I see you and I see me as separate. To be unattached or non-attached or detached means I do not see separation. I see you as a part of me and me as a part of you. And because there is no separation, there is oneness with all. And then selfless action attains fulfillment. The same as becoming powerful by giving up all desire for power. It makes one unwavering and undisturbed by the push and pull of life, keeping one at the center, filling up with peace, calm, bliss, and love. Can't even say filling up. You can imagine that just moving through you. You are just being who you are at the deepest level, connecting with all. I had a conversation with my brother a while back about, he asked me, how do you get to the point of not having or not allowing the system to have power over you? And I said, by giving up the desire to control anything, by giving up the desire to have power. So you want power over the system, But by giving up the desire to have power over the system, you get power. It's a very the concept, the way that I can explain it from my personal experience. When I went through my awakening experiences, I first went through a period of a deep depression which stripped away everything that I believed to be myself, everything that I believed to be true. It stripped it all away. It seemed like a bad thing at the time, but it was a gift, truly, to have all those illusions stripped away. And then I began having these incredible experiences. And through the experiences, I began to notice a deeper power beyond the perspective that I had had for 30 years. And as I began to recognize that inner being, I began to disconnect from societal norms and expectations. Everything that I had grown up to believe I needed to be and I needed to do, I was distancing myself from. I was shedding all those layers. And because I didn't prescribe to society, society had no control over me, because I had no desire to be like others, to do what others were doing anymore. I had no desire to have success the way that I had previously imagined success. And because of that detachment, I could not be moved by situations that previously moved me, not be shaken by people who would previously shake me, or ideas that would previously shake me or move me. And it made me more powerful against the system, because the system had no power against me. Yeah, so that brings us to the end of today's video. We'll see about the next few, whether I'll keep going chronologically or whether I'll jump around. I'll just kind of take it as it comes. But yes, I hope that this was interesting, at least. And if you guys have anything that you wish to share perspective-wise on how you've come to understand the material, please do share in the comments. It always awakens a curiosity and broadens perspective. So yeah, have a good one, and I will see you guys soon.